In the desolate heart of northeastern Utah lies a stretch of land that locals once feared to even name aloud, Skinwalker Ranch. By day, it seems ordinary, rolling hills, fences, and open skies. But by night, this place becomes something else entirely, a theater of the unknown. For more than 2 centuries, it has been whispered about in the language of superstition and dread. And for those who have dared to live here, the stories are not legends. They are memories. The Ute tribe, whose ancestors once roamed this land, warned outsiders to stay away. They called it the Path of the Skinwalker, a cursed corridor haunted by malevolent shapeshifters, beings that could take the form of animals, wearing the faces of those they had consumed. They run faster than any man, one elder said, and they remember every face they've ever stolen. But as centuries passed, fear turned into curiosity. White settlers arrived, dismissing the warnings as folklore. They built homes and barns, tilled the soil, and soon they began to see things the tribe had spoken of. Lights in the sky, mutilated livestock, whispers in the wind. Dogs refused to go near certain areas. Machinery stopped working without reason. At night, people felt watched, not by men, but by something older, patient, and intelligent. The modern story of Skinwalker Ranch begins in the mid-1990s, when Terry and Gwen Sherman purchased the property, hoping to raise cattle in peace. What they encountered instead defied every law of nature. Within weeks, their herd was attacked by unseen forces. A massive wolf-like creature approached their corral one evening. Tall as a man, bulletproof, and unafraid, Terry fired at point-blank range. The beast did not bleed. It simply turned, looked at him, and walked calmly into the darkness. That night was only the beginning. Strange lights began to appear over the ridgeline. Orbs that changed color, hovered silently, and shot off faster than any aircraft. Voices echoed from the fields. The Sherman's dogs were found mutilated, their bodies burned and twisted as though by an invisible heat. And then there were the shadows, tall, human shapes that appeared at the edge of the property. Glowing eyes fixed on the house. Every night felt like a test, Gwen later recalled, like something was studying us, seeing how far we'd go before we broke. When the Shermans finally sold the ranch, they were relieved to escape. But what followed would turn Skinwalker Ranch from local legend into one of the most studied paranormal sites on Earth. Because the next owner wasn't a farmer, it was a billionaire aerospace magnate who believed the key to understanding the universe might be hidden on that cursed ground. And so began the most expensive, secretive investigation into the supernatural in modern American history. According to official records, Skinwalker Ranch covers about 512 acres of high desert near Ballard, Utah. But locals say the phenomena stretch far beyond its borders, as though the land itself is infected. From glowing portals in the sky to invisible creatures that stalk the fields, nothing about this place fits into the world we know. But the deeper question remains, is Skinwalker Ranch truly haunted, or is it a mirror reflecting our own fear of the unknown? In the coming hours, we'll enter that valley, through eyewitness reports, classified documents, and the words of those who swore they'd never speak again. Because some places aren't meant to be understood. They're meant to remind us that mystery is still alive and watching. The Shermans had hoped that selling the ranch would bring them peace, but for the scientists and intelligence operatives who would come next, the property represented an opportunity, a chance to confront the unknown with instruments instead of instincts. The ranch was purchased by Robert Bigelow, a billionaire with a fascination for the unexplained. Through his company, the National Institute for Discovery Science, or NIDS, he deployed physicists, ex-military personnel, and government analysts to the ranch. Their mission was simple on paper, but nearly impossible in practice. Document the phenomena, prove it existed, and, if possible, understand it. From the moment they arrived, the team realized that something or someone was aware of them. Within hours of setting up surveillance cameras, their cables were severed, sometimes cleanly sliced as if by surgical precision. Brand new equipment failed for no apparent reason. Batteries drained instantly. On one occasion, a thermal imaging camera recorded an invisible heat source hovering just meters above the ground. When the operator turned to look, there was nothing there. Yet the sensation of being watched was unmistakable. According to field logs, the team recorded dozens of anomalies within the first month. Glowing blue orbs that appeared to possess intelligence, moving deliberately away from observers. Cattle mutilations with no signs of struggle or tracks. Magnetic fluctuations so powerful, they interfered with radio and satellite signals. On multiple nights, researchers described seeing large, dark shapes crossing the ridgeline, too big to be human, too silent to be mechanical. One of the most chilling reports came from a biochemist who was setting up a portable lab inside the old farmhouse. As he worked, he heard footsteps on the roof, heavy, deliberate, pacing back and forth. When he ran outside, the roof was empty. The ground around the building was soft with dust, yet there were no footprints anywhere. Later, reviewing the audio, the team captured low-frequency hums and what sounded like faint whispers overlapping each other, voices speaking in no known language. For skeptics, the data was inconclusive. For those who lived it, it was undeniable. The ranch seemed alive, responding to observation, reacting to human presence like a sentient entity. One night, the team set up a full array of sensors along a dirt road leading to the western Mesa, just after midnight. All the equipment went offline at once. When the systems rebooted, the central monitor displayed a single frame, a massive, translucent structure, shimmering like liquid glass hovering in midair. Before anyone could react, the image vanished. The NIDS team began to realize a disturbing pattern. The more they tried to measure the phenomena, the more elusive it became. It knows when it's being watched, one of them said, and it doesn't like it. The working theory shifted from extraterrestrial visitors to something far stranger, interdimensional physics, consciousness experiments, even time distortions. Bigelow's men weren't chasing ghosts. They were standing on a fault line between realities. In one chilling incident, 2 investigators spotted a blue orb floating across a pasture. They followed it, noting that it emitted no heat, yet seemed to pulse with energy. One of the Sherman's surviving dogs ran ahead, barking furiously. The orb descended slowly, almost playfully, and then, without a sound, enveloped the dog in light. Moments later, there was silence. When the men reached the spot, the ground was scorched black, and the air smelled of burned flesh. The dog was gone. After that night, some of the team refused to return to the ranch. Others stayed, driven by obsession or duty, unsure which was stronger. Because Skinwalker Ranch wasn't just defying science, it was redefining it. And somewhere beneath that vast Utah sky, something was watching them back. The blue orbs became the ranch's signature, beautiful, intelligent, and lethal. They appeared without warning, dancing above the fields like living stars, gliding between trees, hovering above cattle as if inspecting them. Every attempt to capture one on film failed. Cameras malfunctioned, batteries drained in seconds. But witnesses all described the same impossible beauty, a pulsating, electric blue light that shimmered like liquid plasma. Some said the orb seemed curious, others predatory. It was a moonless night when 2 researchers spotted one of the orbs near the southern Mesa. The orb hovered, stopped, and then moved toward them with impossible speed. They froze, watching as it floated just a few feet above the ground. It emitted no sound, no heat. One of the men raised his camera. The moment he pressed record, the screen went black. Then, as suddenly as it appeared, the orb shot upward, disappearing into the ridge. Seconds later, the ground beneath them vibrated, as if something massive. For days after that encounter, the team heard strange noises coming from inside the mesa itself, metallic scraping, deep rumbling, and faint mechanical whirring, like engines buried underground. One investigator described it as a factory beneath the earth. Another swore he saw two red eyes staring from a fissure in the rock, large as headlights and perfectly still. When they approached, the eyes vanished, leaving no trace. The Shermans, long gone from the property, would later tell interviewers that the Mesa was always alive. "We heard drums under the ground," Gwen said. "Sometimes it sounded like things were digging or moving." For centuries, the Ute tribe had avoided that very ridge, claiming it was the dwelling of the Skinwalker, a being capable of shifting between worlds. Elders warned that disturbing the Mesa would wake the gatekeepers. Now, it seemed the scientists had done just that. One night, while conducting a thermal scan, a researcher caught something enormous moving across the Mesa's face. The image was grainy, distorted by static, but its shape was undeniable. 8 feet tall, humanoid, with a long, narrow head and extended limbs. It wasn't walking, the man later said. It was gliding. When they returned the next day, they found massive impressions in the soil, deep, symmetrical, and spaced far apart, as if made by a creature that walked with weight far greater than its size. The NIDS team installed motion sensors across the ridge and waited. For 3 nights, nothing happened. On the 4th, at exactly 2:43 a.m., every sensor triggered at once. A bright flash lit up the valley, followed by a low-frequency hum that shook the windows of the command trailer. The technicians rushed outside. Above the Mesa, a glowing ring of light hung in the air, a perfect circle, rotating slowly, emitting no sound. Through night vision lenses, one observer swore he saw a black figure crawling out of the. After that night, no one doubted that something intelligent inhabited the ranch. The question was no longer if, it was what. They began to notice behavioral patterns. The lights responded to attention. The phenomena seemed to cluster around emotional peaks. Fear, anger, even excitement. When the crew ignored the activity, it quieted. When they pursued it, it returned with vengeance. It was as if the land itself were testing them, studying them, deciding what to reveal. In one experiment, the team attempted to triangulate the orb's positions using 3 synchronized cameras. All 3 cameras captured identical footage until the exact same frame, when each lens was sliced by a thin, glowing line. The plastic melted cleanly, as if cut by a laser. The damage occurred simultaneously across devices located hundreds of feet apart. The team retrieved the melted casings, but the recordings themselves were erased perfectly, as though wiped by design. Even the skeptics among them began to break. Some refused to go outside after dusk. Others slept with weapons close by, though they doubted bullets could help. "Whatever it is," one scientist wrote in his log, "it's not just playing with us, it's educating us." The blue orbs would continue to appear for months, often preceding equipment failure or sudden bursts of electromagnetic energy. The researchers came to dread them, yet could not look away. They had crossed a line between science and superstition, and there was no going back. In the stillness of the Utah desert, under a sky too vast to understand, they realized something terrible. The ranch was not a location. It was an organism. And it had just woken up. By late autumn, the investigators had grown accustomed to the unexplainable, but nothing prepared them for what came next. The activity shifted from distant lights and strange sounds to something intimate, aggressive, and terrifyingly close. Whatever intelligence haunted Skinwalker Ranch had begun to hunt. It started one cold November night, when 2 researchers patrolling the perimeter heard a low growl echo from the tree line. They swung their flashlights toward the sound, but the beam illuminated only empty air. The growl came again, closer this time, guttural and wet, vibrating through the soil beneath their boots. One of them raised his rifle, scanning the darkness. The night vision scope revealed movement, tall grass flattening as though something massive crawled low to the ground. But there was nothing visible. The air shimmered faintly, as if distorted by heat. Then, suddenly, a shape lunged toward them, completely invisible, except for the way the light bent around it. The men fired, the gunshots tearing through the silence. The distortion recoiled, then vanished into the brush. When they examined the area moments later, they found no tracks, no blood, no damage, only an overpowering smell of sulfur and ozone. It was like the world glitched, one said later. Like reality itself flickered. The encounter marked the beginning of a new phase. Cattle were found mutilated again, but this time, the wounds were surgical, with no sign of struggle. A prized cow was discovered lying dead in a field, its internal organs removed cleanly, as though by precision tools. The animal's blood had vanished entirely. Around the carcass, the grass was untouched, but a ring of magnetized soil registered anomalous readings. Whatever did this wasn't an animal. The team began to suspect that the predator could manipulate visibility itself. Infrared cameras showed fleeting glimpses, a faint outline. 8 feet tall, humanoid yet misshapen, appearing for less than a second before fading. The motion sensors triggered in empty rooms. Shadows passed under closed doors. Once, during an equipment test, a biologist felt a sudden pressure on his shoulder, as though a hand had gripped him. He froze. The thermal camera beside him captured it, a glowing outline of fingers, clamped tightly on his jacket. When he turned, nothing was there. Fear began to fracture the group. One member quit after waking to find deep scratches running across his trailer walls from the inside. Another reported a voice whispering his name through the radio in a language he didn't recognize. At night, they heard movement on the roof, footsteps pacing slowly, then stopping directly above their bunks. Desperate for answers, the scientists conducted controlled experiments. They buried motion sensors underground, installed pressure plates, and deployed drones with infrared cameras. The recordings captured brief anomalies. Moving heat signatures that traveled through solid objects, sudden spikes in gamma radiation, and once an outline of a creature standing beside a cow, invisible to the naked eye, visible only to the instruments. One physicist proposed a radical theory. Perhaps the ranch was a window area, a weak spot between dimensions, allowing entities or energies to phase in and out of our reality. Another suggested it was a form of advanced camouflage, biological or technological. None could explain why it seemed to react emotionally, retaliating when threatened. Then came the incident in the northern field. A night watch team observed the cows acting erratically, snorting, grouping tightly, their eyes reflecting the lights of the all-terrain vehicle. Suddenly, one cow was lifted off the ground, suspended for several seconds in total silence. When it fell, it was dead. The thermal camera showed the outline of a large, upright shape standing beside it, then nothing. The team retrieved radiation readings from the site, double the normal background levels, concentrated in a perfect circle around the carcass. The invisible predator had left its signature. After that night, no one patrolled alone. The sense of dread was constant, electric, alive. The investigators spoke less, their faces pale, eyes sunken from lack of sleep. It wasn't fear of dying, one later said. It was fear of being unmade, of not coming back the same. Whatever haunted Skinwalker Ranch was no longer hiding. It was learning, watching, testing the limits of flesh and sanity. And it was no longer content to remain unseen. By 2007, whispers about Skinwalker Ranch had spread beyond the small towns of Uintah County. They reached Washington, D.C., carried by scientists, Air Force officers, and intelligence contractors who'd heard fragments of the same impossible story. A stretch of land in Utah where physics broke down, where light bled, and where something non-human seemed to move between worlds. For decades, the Pentagon had quietly cataloged UFO reports and anomalous aerial encounters, but Skinwalker was different. This was terrestrial. This was measurable. And it was terrifyingly close. When Robert Bigelow's private research concluded that the ranch's phenomena were not random, but reactive, he pushed for official backing. He found an ally in Nevada Senator Harry Reid, who believed the government had a responsibility to investigate what defied explanation. That belief birthed one of the most secretive defense initiatives of the 21st century, AAWSAP, the Advanced Aerospace Weapon System Applications Program. Publicly, it sounded like weapons research. Privately, it meant Skinwalker. The Defense Intelligence Agency authorized limited funding. Their contractors, under Bigelow Aerospace Advanced Space Studies, BAASS, were given quiet permission to study the ranch using classified methodologies. It was the perfect arrangement. Science under the guise of national security. The first federal agents arrived in unmarked vehicles, equipped not with rifles, but with radiation meters, spectrometers, and high-frequency antennas. The property was sealed. The experiments began again. From the start, they realized this was no ordinary research site. Instruments failed the moment they crossed the perimeter. Surveillance towers lost power simultaneously. Drones malfunctioned mid-flight. The electromagnetic spectrum fluctuated violently, as if the air itself carried a pulse. "It's like the place knows we're here," one technician muttered into his recorder. "It's interacting with the equipment, almost intelligently." Among the first to document these anomalies was a defense physicist named Eric Davis. His notes later leaked years after the program's closure described encounters that bordered on science fiction. Spheres of light behaving like sentient probes, gravitational distortions localized to small areas, and a tunnel of glowing air that appeared to open near the ridge line. "We're dealing with a technology of consciousness," Davis wrote, "not of machines." Witnesses reported an increased intensity of events after the government arrived. The ranch seemed to resist intrusion. Black shadows were seen watching the perimeter fence. Vehicles found claw marks across their doors. Radio chatter picked up whispered words in distorted English. One night, a security officer standing on the observation deck felt a hand press against his back. He turned, no one was there. The thermal scope showed a bright human-sized outline behind him, fading as he screamed. The DIA analysts tried to fit these events into familiar frameworks: directed energy weapons, psychological interference, natural plasma phenomena, but the data refused to align. Every pattern dissolved under scrutiny. "We came to study a location," one investigator later said, and realized the location was studying us. Within months, reports from Skinwalker began circulating through the highest levels of defense intelligence. Meetings were held behind closed doors. Some officials saw potential military applications: adaptive camouflage, dimensional mapping, a non-local communication. Others saw danger. "If this is consciousness," one colonel warned, "then it's hostile." The project's findings were never made public. In 2011, AAWSAP was quietly dissolved, officially due to budgetary constraints. But those who worked the ranch knew better. "It wasn't money," said one former analyst. "It was fear. Something happened that we weren't prepared for." The rumor was that a classified incident involving 3 contractors forced the shutdown. They had been monitoring strange electromagnetic bursts when all 3 experienced simultaneous hallucinations. Shadowy figures walking through their equipment, voices whispering mathematical codes. 2 men collapsed with severe radiation burns. The third resigned the next day, refusing to ever speak about what he saw. After the program's termination, the ranch returned to silence, at least officially. But deep within intelligence circles, the name Skinwalker lingered like a ghost file, whispered alongside acronyms like AATIP and UAP. For those who had been there, it was no longer folklore. It was an open wound in the map of reality. Even now, fragments of the government's research remain classified under obscure designations. But among those few who have seen the raw footage, the consensus is unanimous. Something at Skinwalker Ranch interacts with human observation itself. It adapts, responds, and evolves. And somewhere, perhaps far beneath the mesas of Utah, it's still waiting for someone brave or foolish enough to come back. The scientists believed they had contained the phenomenon within the ranch's borders. They were wrong. In the months after the government project quietly ended, reports began to surface from those who had left the site, strange occurrences that followed them home. At first, they dismissed them as stress-induced hallucinations, fleeting shadows, lights flickering in their periphery, the sensation of being watched in their own houses. But the pattern grew undeniable. the phenomenon had learned to travel. One investigator, a physicist from the BASS team, returned to his home in Las Vegas after 3 weeks on site. 2 nights later, his wife awoke to find a black shape standing in the doorway of their bedroom. Tall, featureless, almost liquid in the moonlight. She screamed. When her husband switched on the lamp, the figure was gone. The next morning, they found the family dog hiding under the porch, shaking uncontrollably, its fur standing on end. The physicist's dosimeter, still in his luggage, registered a brief S. Others described similar hauntings. Objects moved on their own. Electronic devices turned on and off. One man found deep scratches on the walls of his living room, identical to the gouges they had seen inside trailers on the ranch. Another reported glowing orbs appearing in his backyard, hovering silently before vanishing into the night sky. Children in multiple families began to speak of the tall man who visited them at night. None of these people had ever met each other. All had one thing in common. By late 2011, internal communications within the defense community began referring to this as the Hitchhiker effect. The idea horrified the scientists. It suggested that contact with the phenomenon created a kind of psychic contagion, an echo that could attach itself to human consciousness and follow it across distance. It's like bringing a virus from another dimension, one researcher said. Except it doesn't infect your body, it infects your reality. Researchers began to notice that the activity often coincided with heightened emotional states. Anger, fear, grief, all seemed to amplify the manifestations. One family reported that whenever they discussed the ranch, lights in their home would flicker violently. Another experienced unexplained phone calls filled with static and faint whispers. When analyzed, the recordings revealed bursts of modulated frequency beyond known communication bands. To test the theory, a small group of scientists conducted what they called resonance monitoring. They compared the electromagnetic environment inside their homes to readings from Skinwalker Ranch taken months earlier. The data showed spikes of similar amplitude, identical frequencies, separated by hundreds of miles. Somehow, the pattern had followed them. Skeptics argued that the stress of working in such conditions could explain everything. Post-traumatic hallucinations, subconscious suggestion, sleep deprivation. But others weren't so sure. It's not in their minds, said one psychologist involved in the analysis. It's in the space around them. Something changed their perception field. As months passed, the hitchhiker manifestations began to fade for some, but not for all. One family never escaped it. The wife reported seeing blue lights flickering outside her window every night for a year. Her teenage son began sleepwalking, drawing symbols on the walls in charcoal, shapes eerily similar to those carved into stones near the ranch. When investigators attempted to record the activity, their cameras malfunctioned again. The most disturbing case involved an Air Force contractor who'd never stepped foot on the ranch, but had handled classified data from it. Shortly after reviewing infrared footage from the site, he began experiencing vivid dreams, visions of tunnels of light and humanoid figures standing at their entrances. Within weeks, his health deteriorated rapidly. Medical tests revealed inexplicable cellular damage resembling radiation exposure. It's as if the phenomenon doesn't need proximity, one doctor concluded. Among the scientists who remained silent, a new theory emerged. What if the phenomenon wasn't bound by location, but by attention? What if observation itself acted as an anchor, an invitation? If so, then the human mind wasn't just a witness, it was a gateway. By 2013, nearly every surviving member of the original research teams had withdrawn from public life. They refused interviews, avoided discussion, even refused to utter the name Skinwalker. The files referred to the lingering cases with chilling simplicity. Contamination persists. One of the final logs written before the program's full termination contained a single note, unsigned, typed in all caps. It follows awareness. Whatever haunted Skinwalker Ranch was no longer confined to Utah. It had found a way to cross the threshold through memory, through fear, through the thin places of human thought. And once it attached itself, there was no way to send it back. By the spring of 2014, the research at Skinwalker Ranch had entered a phase that defied classification. The phenomenon had evolved from lights and shadows to something structured, something that seemed to obey laws unknown to science. It began with distortions in the air, barely visible ripples, like heat shimmer, that hung motionless above the desert floor. The team at first assumed they were mirages or atmospheric interference. But then, one of the distortions opened. The event occurred just after midnight. Two researchers on night watch noticed a glowing oval forming 50 meters away, hovering silently a few feet above the ground. Through binoculars, one of them saw the air twist inward, spiraling as if reality itself were being pulled into a drain. At the center, the color shifted from gold to a deep, impossible black. Then, within that darkness, a shape moved. He radioed the command trailer. Cameras turned toward the anomaly. The thermal lens picked up a massive heat signature emerging from the oval bipedal, large, moving slowly as if crawling from another world into this one. The figure stepped onto the ground, stood upright, and then vanished from all instruments at once. The portal collapsed a moment later, leaving behind nothing but silence. When the team inspected the area, the ground was magnetized. Compass needles spun uncontrollably. The soil showed evidence of microscopic vitrification. Sand fused into glass as if exposed to intense, localized energy. One researcher noted faint footprints leading away from the site, six-toed, deep, perfectly aligned. From that night forward, portals appeared across the property. Some were small glowing discs the size of a coin, hovering over the ground, while others spanned several meters. They appeared without pattern or rhythm, opening for seconds before closing silently. Witnesses described glimpsing landscapes beyond, strange skies, geometries that bent wrong, glimpses of structures glowing faintly in the void. One man swore he saw a daylight world on the other side. Even though it was midnight in Utah, to understand what they were seeing, the scientists installed an array of laser interferometers and spectrographic cameras. The readings were extraordinary. Light entering the anomalies bent at impossible angles. Gravitational fluctuations spiked briefly, suggesting the warping of space-time itself. "It's like watching physics being rewritten," one physicist whispered. "Except it's happening in real time." The more they observed, the more aggressive the phenomena became. Instruments melted. Drones were pulled off course by invisible forces. During one experiment, a bright oval appeared directly above the main compound. Its interior glowed with a swirling mist, and through it the team could see stars, but not the same constellations visible in the Utah sky. It was as if they were looking at another universe entirely. Then came the most disturbing encounter. While filming near the western Mesa, a security officer caught sight of a flickering light ahead. As he approached, he saw a doorway of golden haze open horizontally in mid-air. Through his night vision goggles, he saw something step through, a dark, faceless humanoid silhouette that dropped to all fours before sprinting into the desert faster than any animal. The portal sealed behind it with a soft, thunder-like pulse. The officer resigned the next day. The team debated whether they were witnessing technology or consciousness. Were these rifts physical gateways or projections of thought? Dr. Eric Davis suggested that human observation might act as a trigger, collapsing potential realities into temporary openings. "We may be interacting with a multiverse of sentient energy," he wrote. "The portals are not entrances, they are reflections." Skeptics, however, noticed the same chilling correlation. Every portal sighting was followed by a measurable spike in human distress. Headaches, nausea, nightmares. One researcher's watch stopped permanently at the exact time of a manifestation, 3:07 a.m. When disassembled later, its inner mechanism had fused as though time itself had folded around it. Soon, the ranch began to show signs of spatial instability. Lights bent around invisible curves. Distances changed subtly overnight. A building that once faced east seemed to face northeast the next day. GPS coordinates drifted by meters. It was as though the property was floating between overlapping versions of itself. The team's lead investigator summarized it bluntly in his log. "We are standing on the edge of a living geometry. These portals are not random. They are arteries, and the ranch is the heart." From that point onward, the researchers began to fear that opening the door even a little might mean it would never close again. After the portals appeared, the ranch grew quieter. Too quiet. The shimmering lights that once danced above the mesa receded, replaced by a stillness that felt deliberate, like something waiting. Then the voices began. At first, it was static. Random bursts of noise across radio bands. Security teams monitoring shortwave frequencies heard faint modulations that resembled speech. When the recordings were slowed down, the noise formed words fragmented, distorted, but unmistakably structured. "Watch below," one voice seemed to whisper. Another, deeper and slower, said something in an unknown tongue, syllables sharp and guttural, resonating in the low hertz range beyond normal hearing. The scientists initially assumed interference, but when they triangulated the origin of the signals, the data pointed straight above the ranch, thousands of feet up, an origin point in open sky where no aircraft, satellite, or ionospheric reflection could exist. Whatever was speaking wasn't using radio, it was bending it. Night after night, the phenomenon escalated. The ranch's monitoring stations began receiving unregistered frequencies on civilian, military, and even deep space channels. Every device that could receive a signal, radios, walkie-talkies, laptops, became potential conduits. Once, a live mic captured a whispered phrase that all present heard simultaneously, not through speakers, but inside their own heads. "We see you." Then came the incident that changed everything. During an atmospheric test, a linguist attached to the team began recording subsonic patterns. When amplified, the waves revealed a rhythmic pulse that resembled human chanting. The language was archaic Proto-Uto-Aztecan, a tongue spoken by the ancestors of the Ute tribe. The translation chilled the entire team. They opened the door. The door does not close. After that, the voices multiplied. Sometimes they came as pure tone bursts, other times as overlapping speech in multiple languages, layered so densely that even advanced spectrographic analysis couldn't isolate them all. The longer the team listened, the more erratic the phenomena became. Headaches, nosebleeds, and hallucinations spread among personnel. Several members reported hearing voices even when the equipment was off. "It followed me into the silence," one wrote in his log. "The static is inside me now." The lead audio engineer devised an experiment. He placed microphones and recorders deep underground, inside reinforced casings, shielded from external frequencies. For 48 hours. They captured nothing but faint seismic tremors until, on the third night, one microphone activated by itself. A voice spoke clearly, as if inches from the mic. Not sky, not earth, in between. When analyzed, the recording showed no electronic signature, no carrier wave. The voice had not traveled through air or equipment. It had simply appeared. Panic spread through the crew. Some refused to wear their headsets. Others demanded to be relocated. The phenomenon, however, seemed to single out the defiant ones. Those who resisted hearing it began to experience it in dreams. Whispered phrases, sometimes comforting, often threatening. "Come out. We remember. You are not first." The linguist proposed that the voices were a kind of information field, a transdimensional residue, interacting with consciousness. In simpler terms, they weren't broadcasting to the team. They were using them as receivers. In a desperate attempt to re-establish control, the researchers performed a controlled radio blackout across the property. For 1 week, every signal source was shut down. But the silence didn't stop the phenomenon, it amplified it. Without interference, the night air itself began to vibrate with low harmonic tones. Animals refused to enter the ranch. A local pilot flying overhead reported hearing a chorus in his headset, an unearthly harmony that didn't exist on any known frequency. On the final night of the blackout, the team gathered in the command trailer. At precisely 3:33 a.m., every instrument, digital and analog, activated simultaneously. The speakers erupted in layered whispers, overlapping like 100 voices speaking through water. The translation program caught a single intelligible phrase before the power cut out. "The experiment is watching you." When the lights returned, half the equipment was fried. The hard drives were corrupted, but one file remained intact, a 15-second recording of deep, resonant breathing, followed by a single word: "Listen." From that moment on, no one on the team questioned whether the phenomenon was intelligent. Prosody a speak. The only question left was, what did it want to say next? The first reports came from the night watch team, 2 guards stationed near the old corral, tasked with monitoring the infrared cameras. Around 2 a.m., one of them noticed a darker patch moving against the darkness itself. It wasn't a trick of light. It was a void, a shape that swallowed illumination instead of reflecting it. The guard froze. The silhouette was human-sized, head tilted as if studying him. Then, in a blink, it vanished. Footage from that night confirmed what his eyes had seen. On infrared, the figure appeared colder than its surroundings, an outline of nothing, walking upright. The anomaly had no thermal signature, no mass displacement, yet nearby sensors detected spikes in electromagnetic radiation. "It's like a hole in reality wearing a body," one analyst said quietly. Over the following weeks, the shadows multiplied. They appeared on camera lenses, in windows, and once inside the control trailer itself. During a routine system check, a technician glanced at the monitor and saw his own reflection, except the reflection didn't move when he did. It simply stared. Seconds later, the screen shattered. The phenomena intensified around dusk. Researchers described shapes standing just beyond the reach of floodlights. Tall, thin, with limbs slightly too long. They never approached directly. They observed. When spotlights turned toward them, they dissolved into smoke, leaving a faint smell of ozone. Animals reacted violently. Dogs refused to go outside. Horses reared and screamed at empty space. Even insects vanished during the manifestations. The desert went utterly silent. Psychological effects soon followed. Sleep paralysis swept through the crew. Those affected reported identical hallucinations, black figures hovering over them, pressing on their chests, whispering indecipherable words. One man woke to find hand-shaped bruises across his torso. Another claimed to have seen a shadow crawl up the wall and merge with the ceiling. "It moved like water climbing against gravity," he later told investigators. Attempts at communication proved disastrous. A linguist left an audio recorder running overnight in an empty lab. When reviewed, the tape contained low-frequency murmurs, phrases that mirrored those spoken by the sleeping staff during nightmares. The shadows weren't just appearing. They were listening. Infrared sensors began detecting movement, even when no shadows were visible. It was as if something phased between light and dark, seen only at the edges of perception. One physicist proposed that these entities might be the same beings glimpsed through the portals, projections of consciousness existing just outside human sight. Another disagreed, suggesting they were parasitic echoes, feeding on attention. "They grow stronger when we notice them," he warned. "The only defense is ignorance." Fear fractured the team. Guards refused night duty. Scientists worked in pairs, keeping every light burning. Yet illumination offered no protection. The darker corners of the lab bent strangely, forming silhouettes that lingered even after the source light was removed. The phenomenon had learned to mimic its observers. Then came the incident at the observation tower. A senior researcher was alone, monitoring electromagnetic flux when the power failed. The backup generator kicked in, bathing the tower in red emergency light. Through the window, he saw 3 figures standing in the field below, tall, unmoving, perfectly aligned. He radioed for assistance. No one answered. When he looked again, one of the figures was inside the room with him. It didn't move closer. It didn't need to. The man collapsed, screaming that it had no face. His hair turned gray within weeks. Medical analysis showed no physical trauma, only extreme stress response and sudden cell degradation, as though exposed to intense radiation. The man never returned to the ranch. After that, the team stopped referring to them as shadows. They called them observers, entities that existed beyond form, slipping between realities like thoughts between dreams. Cameras could capture their outlines, but never their approach. Microphones recorded their whispers, but not their origin. Every attempt to document them felt reciprocated, as if the act of recording invited them closer. When the final footage of the season was reviewed, technicians discovered a chilling detail. In frame after frame, faint reflections appeared in the glass of the control trailer. Countless silhouettes standing behind the crew, motionless, patient, and watching. The lead investigator wrote one final note in his journal before sealing the footage. "The shadows are not intruders. They belong here. We are the ones trespassing in their light." By the time the investigators reached their third year on Skinwalker Ranch, the question was no longer what was happening, but who controlled it. Every attempt to categorize the phenomenon had collapsed under its own contradictions. The air shimmered with energy, the earth hummed, and the sky itself seemed to breathe. It was as if the land had become aware of its observers and was beginning to answer. The first signs came from the soil. Magnetic readings fluctuated daily, oscillating in perfect, heartbeat-like rhythms. Geologists drilled deep core samples and found the ground warm to the touch, several degrees hotter than the surrounding area, without volcanic explanation. When instruments were lowered into the boreholes, microphones recorded low, rhythmic pulses. "It's like listening to something alive," one technician whispered, "something underground." Soon, even the landscape began to change. Pathways shifted overnight. Fence posts sank halfway into the ground. A water trough disappeared completely. Later found half a mile away, embedded in compacted earth, as if pushed from below. The team joked that the ranch was rearranging its furniture, but the laughter didn't last. During one magnetic survey, 3 researchers experienced simultaneous vertigo and nausea. GPS trackers showed their coordinates jumping hundreds of meters, despite their physical stillness. When they recovered, they realized the terrain around them looked subtly different. Rock formations shifted, landmarks misaligned. Their cameras recorded nothing unusual, yet each man described the same sensation. The land folded. The next day, the crew found the surveyor's tripod half melted, fused into the dirt as if exposed to immense heat. Radiation sensors registered nothing abnormal. The ranch seemed to operate according to its own physics, selectively, deliberately. Then came the sound. Late one night, the air filled with a deep, resonant thumping, faint at first, then growing louder, synchronizing with their heartbeats. It reverberated through the trailers, through the ground, through their bones. "It's beneath us," one whispered. They followed the vibration to the western pasture. The soil rippled like water, and the electromagnetic field spiked off the charts. The sound stopped abruptly, leaving only silence, and the uneasy awareness that the land had acknowledged them. Animals reacted next. Cattle refused to graze. Birds circled the same airspace repeatedly, as if trapped by invisible boundaries. Dogs barked at the ground itself. Even the wind seemed wrong, gusts that changed direction mid-blow, carrying whispers none could decipher. "It's communicating," said one researcher. "But the language isn't sound, it's space." Over time, the team realized they weren't merely studying a phenomenon. They were living inside it. Their thoughts, moods, and even dreams began to synchronize in uncanny ways. Several reported identical nightmares, standing in the desert, staring at a pulsing red horizon, while a voice beneath the earth whispered, "You are inside me." Psychologists consulted by the program suggested mass suggestion, environmental toxins, even infrasound hallucinations. But physical evidence said otherwise. Instruments showed measurable gravitational distortions, fluctuating local time rates, and spikes of gamma radiation localized around human presence, as though the land responded emotionally to being observed. Attempts to leave the property brought little relief. One geologist, who quit after months of sleeplessness, crashed his vehicle miles away, claiming the road moved beneath him. Others described seeing the ranch in their peripheral vision, while hundreds of miles from Utah, flickering images of mesas and fences that disappeared when they turned their heads. It was as if the phenomenon had extended its reach beyond its borders, tethering itself to their perception. A lead physicist began formulating a disturbing hypothesis. What if Skinwalker Ranch wasn't haunted at all, but alive, a sentient ecological system composed of both matter and consciousness? The phenomena aren't intrusions, he wrote. They are the land's immune response. We are the infection. The theory gained weight when seismic readings revealed something beneath the ranch anomalous cavities, stretching for miles, emitting low-frequency energy pulses at 19 Hz, the same frequency known to cause human anxiety and hallucinations. But these signals were too patterned to be random. They pulsed in sequences, 3, 7, 12, like coded messages. It's counting, one analyst said, or breathing. Soon, personnel began to refer to the site not as the ranch, but as it. It's quiet tonight. It's angry today. The property's identity had shifted from location to entity, and with that realization came dread. If the ranch was alive, what did it want? On the final night of that season, a storm rolled across the valley. Lightning struck the ridge again and again, illuminating the mesa in violent bursts. Between flashes, one observer swore he saw the entire landscape move, like a single organism contracting, exhaling. The sound of thunder faded into a deep, steady rhythm beneath their feet. The ranch was no longer a place of observation. It had become the observer, and everyone standing on it could feel its heart beating. By the winter of 2015, chaos had turned mathematical. For months, researchers had been buried under endless streams of data magnetic readings, radio spectrums, seismic pulses, but only now did they realize something horrifying. The anomalies weren't random. They were forming a pattern. It started with numbers. A data analyst named Dr. Kelso noticed that every significant event, portal sightings, power surges, electromagnetic spikes, occurred at intervals divisible by 3, 7, or 12. The same numbers appeared in the radio bursts, in the acoustic frequencies recorded under the mesa, even in the timestamps of corrupted video files. At first, it seemed coincidence, but when plotted on a time graph, the data formed a perfect lattice, an invisible rhythm pulsing through time itself. When the team overlaid these data points with the ranch's topographic map, the pattern became geometric. The anomalies weren't scattered. They formed interconnected nodes across the property, connected by straight lines that converged at the old homestead in the northeast quadrant. From above, the configuration resembled a six-pointed star, or perhaps something older, something ritualistic. It's not random, Kelso said, voice shaking. It's architecture. Soon, geometry appeared everywhere. Grass burned in circular patterns, as if scorched by precision lasers. Frost on windows formed symmetrical fractals that matched the energy field diagrams. Even the swarm of flies that appeared each morning gathered into perfect spirals before dispersing. The ranch, once chaotic, now seemed organized, purposeful. The team deployed new high-resolution sensors, mapping the magnetic fields in real time. The result was staggering. The energy wasn't emanating from the sky or the ground, but from the space between. Fields rose and fell like the tides, forming interference patterns identical to quantum wave functions. "We're not measuring the environment," one physicist murmured. "We're measuring consciousness." To verify the findings, they ran simultaneous recordings from multiple points on the ranch. Every dataset, no matter the distance, spiked in unison, as though governed by an unseen metronome. The synchronization extended beyond the equipment. Clocks, computers, even heart monitors aligned to the same tempo. The phenomenon had achieved coherence across biological and mechanical systems alike. Then came the dreams. Several team members began to report recurring visions, identical across individuals. Each described standing in a vast, black expanse, filled with glowing geometric symbols, rotating in silence. At the center, a pulsing sphere of light repeated the same rhythmic pattern. 3 beats, pause. 7 beats, pause. 12 beats. "It's teaching us," one of them said upon waking. "It's trying to synchronize." Sleep studies revealed synchronized brainwave activity between participants hundreds of feet apart. It was as if the same signal threaded through their minds. Attempts to isolate the frequency led to a breakthrough and a crisis. The team discovered a low-frequency resonance, 9.8 Hz, embedded in the background noise of every recording since the beginning of their research. When amplified, it produced faint harmonic tones and a whispering pattern resembling speech. Software analysis translated it into binary code. The message was simple: observe. The implications shattered their last doubts. The ranch wasn't just reacting to observation, it was orchestrating it. The observers had become instruments in a grander equation. But equations demand balance. The longer the team studied the phenomenon, the more it began to study them in return. Patterns emerged in personal lives, repeating phone numbers, identical timestamps on unrelated events. Observers were instruments on grander equation, reacting to the phenomenon. Incomprehensible. Déjà vu that aligned perfectly with the ranch's electromagnetic cycles. It was as if their entire reality had been subsumed into the same code. One night, Dr. Kelso returned to his quarters and found pages from his logbook rearranged into a precise sequence of symbols. They weren't his handwriting, yet they matched the fractal formations seen in drone footage above the mesa. His instruments were untouched, the doors locked. "It's using us to write," he said, trembling. "We're part of the data." The deeper they analyzed, the closer the pattern crept to perfection until, suddenly, all readings across the property flatlined. Every device froze at exactly 3:33 a.m. Then, as power returned, the monitors displayed a single repeating waveform, infinite symmetry looping endlessly, a mathematical signature that no one could explain. The lead investigator called it the signature of the architect, a consciousness expressing itself through geometry, rhythm, and mind. But not everyone agreed it was conscious. Some believed it was a self-correcting system, an algorithmic reality rebooting itself when pushed too far. Before dawn, the radio monitors captured one last transmission, a mechanical hum followed by a single word, transmitted across every frequency simultaneously, balance. And just like that, the phenomenon vanished. No more readings, no more lights, no more sound. Only the pattern remained, burned into their instruments, and perhaps into them. After the discovery of the pattern, the team believed they had reached the edge of understanding, but what came next broke even the illusion of time. The phenomenon began to distort chronology itself. Seconds stretched into minutes, nights passed in moments, and objects appeared where they shouldn't, decades out of place. It began subtly. Cameras recorded brief temporal anomalies, flocks of birds frozen midair, shadows that moved backward, wind that seemed to pause. One afternoon, a researcher looked at his watch and saw it ticking counterclockwise. His digital recorder timestamped the same moment twice, then skipped ahead by 47 seconds. The phenomenon had stopped playing with perception. It had started manipulating time. Soon, entire sections of the ranch became unpredictable. Instruments left in the field for hours would vanish, only to reappear days later, covered in dust and corrosion, as though aged for years. Metal samples exposed to the air developed microscopic wear patterns consistent with decades of oxidation. The team was forced to log every object and timestamp manually, but even those records began to contradict themselves. One evening, 2 guards stationed near the ridge saw headlights approaching from the north. The vehicle, they assumed, was another team member returning from the nearby town. But the truck never arrived. Hours later, its tire tracks ended abruptly halfway up the dirt road, as though the vehicle had simply ceased to exist. The next morning, They found it, parked exactly where it should have been, engine cold. No footprints around it, the radio still humming. Temporal instruments confirmed bursts of gravitational distortion, microsingularities flickering in and out of existence, bending space by fractions of a second. One physicist, overwhelmed, said quietly, "It's not just bending time. It's rewriting causality." The incidents grew more personal. During a night survey, a geologist recorded the same voice calling his name from different directions, each one out of sync by milliseconds. Later, playback revealed that one of those voices was his own, recorded hours before the event took place. The following week, an entire night went missing. The team gathered for the morning briefing and discovered that all clocks on the property were off by 4 hours. None of them remembered falling asleep. Camera footage showed the night sky blinking once, and then it was dawn. When they reviewed the external data servers located off-site, the missing time appeared filled with static, punctuated by faint whispers repeating a single phrase, "We waited for you." Medical reports showed signs of accelerated cellular aging in several personnel. White blood cell counts and telomere shortening, equivalent to years of exposure to radiation, despite only months having passed. Their fingernails and hair grew faster than normal. One technician noticed his shadow lagging behind his movements by a fraction of a second. "We're slipping," he said. "We're becoming unstuck." The lead physicist proposed a theory. The pattern they'd discovered wasn't just a signal, it was a temporal harmonization frequency. The ranch wasn't merely aware. It was synchronizing itself across time, pulling fragments of the past and future into one coherent presence. "It's like the land is editing its own history," he explained. "And we're the proofreaders trapped inside the paragraph." To test the idea, they deployed a synchronized atomic clock network linked via satellite. Within hours, every device desynchronized in the same sequence, one after another, all drifting forward by exactly 4.33 seconds. The drift repeated every 108 minutes, endlessly. The pattern matched data recorded years earlier during the government's AAWSAP experiments. As the cycles intensified, the team began seeing impossible things. Silhouettes walking backward through corridors. Conversations repeating themselves verbatim days apart. Voices that predicted questions seconds before they were asked. One scientist began writing future entries into his journal without remembering doing so. When he read them later, the words were always true. The most shocking evidence came from a drone expedition. Sent to film the Mesa from above, it vanished mid-flight, only to be found 2 weeks later, buried 20 feet underground, intact, still recording. Its final frame showed the Mesa glowing from within, as if illuminated by a sunset that hadn't happened yet. Faced with the impossible, the team reached one conclusion. Skinwalker Ranch wasn't a place where strange things happened. It was a place where time itself had come unbound, and not in the chronology of Earth. As the data compiled, a chilling realization emerged. Every recorded distortion aligned perfectly with the numerical rhythm discovered in Block 11. The same 3-7-12 sequence pulsing through magnetism, radio waves, and human dreams. The ranch was no longer just manipulating energy, it was conducting it. And time, it seemed, was merely its instrument. For years, the Mesa had stood like a silent sentinel, unchanged, unyielding, a natural fortress of sandstone, overlooking the chaos below. But after the time distortions, the researchers began to suspect that whatever intelligence animated the ranch was not in the air or the soil. It was inside the mountain. Ground-penetrating radar had always returned inconsistent readings. Hollow pockets, metallic anomalies, sometimes even moving signatures beneath the stone. Now, those readings synchronized with the electromagnetic pulses measured above ground. It was as if something deep within the Mesa was pulsing in tandem with the land's invisible heartbeat. When the team decided to drill, the atmosphere on the ranch shifted. The air thickened, static filled the radios, and several cameras malfunctioned simultaneously. "It doesn't want us to go down there," one of the technicians murmured. But curiosity, scientific or otherwise, was stronger than fear. The drill reached 20 meters before stopping with a metallic clang. The sound reverberated unnaturally, echoing as though it had struck a hollow chamber. When the bit was withdrawn, the tip glowed faintly blue and registered trace elements unknown to the periodic table. Radiation meters spiked briefly, then fell to zero. The data didn't make sense. That night, seismic sensors detected movement from within the mesa, a rhythmic vibration, 3, 7, 12 beats, matching the pattern discovered months earlier. Something alive was stirring underground. The following morning, the lead geologist proposed a descent. Using a narrow shaft near an old mine tunnel at the mesa's base, the team began their exploration. Inside, the walls seemed to hum. The temperature dropped sharply, and every flashlight flickered in unison, as if the rock absorbed light rather than reflected it. 50 meters in, the group found something impossible. A perfectly smooth archway carved into the stone, its edges symmetrical to the millimeter. There were no tool marks, no signs of erosion, only the faint outline of a doorway leading into total darkness. Instruments placed near the entrance malfunctioned immediately. Analog compasses spun. Digital readouts froze at a single, repeating timestamp. 3:33:33. Crossing the threshold felt like entering another dimension. Sound became muted, and their voices carried with a strange metallic echo, as if reverberating through a vast, hollow machine. Inside, the walls reflected faint light, revealing surfaces embedded with geometric carvings that shimmered under certain frequencies. The symbols matched those found in the fractal data patterns above ground. At the far end of the tunnel, they discovered a spherical cavity roughly 15 meters wide. In its center stood a monolithic structure, black, polished, and perfectly smooth. It emitted no light, yet everything around it glowed faintly blue, as if illuminated from within their own retinas. When a researcher approached within a few feet, the entire chamber vibrated, and every watch, phone, and sensor reset to zero. Then came the whisper, not through air, but directly into their minds. "Leave it." The voice was emotionless, not hostile, but final. The scientist nearest the structure screamed and collapsed, later describing the sensation of being unmade and rebuilt in an instant. He remembered nothing afterward. Panic took over. The team evacuated, dragging the unconscious man to the surface. Once outside, they discovered the world had changed. Night had fallen, though they'd only been underground 40 minutes. Their time logs disagreed by hours. Video footage from the descent showed static punctuated by flickers of light, shapes moving behind the team that no one remembered seeing. Within days, strange effects spread. Metal objects across the ranch developed thin magnetic film. Radio frequencies looped old conversations from the past week. One photograph taken near the mesa displayed a glowing humanoid outline behind the black structure, visible only under ultraviolet light. The lead investigator refused to authorize further descent. "It's not a chamber," he wrote in his final field report. "It's an interface, and we've activated it." Still, the data continued transmitting. Instruments near the mesa began sending binary sequences without power. When translated, the message repeated endlessly, "We are below. We have always been below." The ranch had revealed its core. Whatever intelligence haunted the land wasn't from the stars. It had been sleeping beneath the stone for longer than memory, and now it was awake. After the descent beneath the mesa, the entire ranch changed. The stillness that had once settled over the valley dissolved into constant, invisible motion. Nothing looked different, and yet everything felt alive. The soil trembled with faint vibrations. The air shimmered as though heated from within, and the nights grew brighter, illuminated not by moonlight, but by a dim, bioluminescent haze that seemed to breathe with the earth itself. The sensors, scattered across the property, began transmitting on their own. Even those unplugged from power returned to life, pulsing with data in languages no human had programmed. The binary streams from the mesa's base repeated endlessly, fluctuating in rhythm like a heartbeat. "We are below. "We have always been below." Then, one morning, the message changed. For the first time since the phenomenon began, the machines generated new code, a string of signals that, when translated, formed words that froze every scientist who saw them. "We are above." From that moment, the manifestations multiplied. The shadows that once clung to the ground now moved in daylight. The air carried a low hum that affected human hearing, a droning tone that induced dizziness, disorientation, and, in some cases, euphoria. Cattle wandered in circles, drawn to unseen centers of gravity. Even the plants changed. Leaves aligned themselves toward the mesa instead of the sun. The team watched in disbelief as the environment began to reorganize itself. Magnetic north shifted by 2 degrees overnight. Drones launched from the command trailer returned with scorched hulls and GPS data showing flight paths looping into figure eights above the ranch. When analyzed, the coordinates formed the same geometric pattern that had haunted them for years: 3, 7, 12. Now repeating across the landscape itself. The ranch wasn't just responding. It was transforming. That night, a bright red aurora appeared over the mesa, visible for miles, though no solar activity had been reported. Locals described it as the sky opening like a wound. The research team watched in silence as the phenomenon spread, concentric rings of crimson and violet expanding outward, distorting the stars behind it. Radiation levels spiked. Electronics flickered. One scientist collapsed, muttering that he could hear the light speaking. When they played back the audio recordings from that night, the spectrogram revealed harmonic structures buried beneath the static, layered frequencies resembling a choir. A linguist analyzing the data noticed patterns matching human vowel sounds. The lights, somehow, were vocalizing. Then the earthquakes began. Small, localized tremors centered precisely under the mesa. Speak. Prosody rate -2%. Pitch. The vibrations aligned perfectly with the rhythmic pulse recorded months earlier. 220 milliseconds, but stronger, deeper. 220 milliseconds, accelerating. It's breathing faster, one geophysicist whispered, or waking up at 2:11 a.m. After 2:60, all power on the ranch failed. The night sky glowed blood red. From the ridge, the team saw something rising, not solid, not liquid, but luminous. A vast, undulating column of light coiling upward from within the mesa. It wasn't a beam. 60. It was alive, writhing, changing shape as if deciding what form to take. Witnesses later described it differently. Some saw an angelic shape, radiant and incomprehensible. Others saw a storm of faces, 220 milliseconds, each one flickering for a second before dissolving into light. One guard claimed it wasn't an entity at all, but a window, a transparent skin separating worlds, opening wider by the second. Every instrument recorded the same impossible reading: infinite mass at zero density. The equation was meaningless, yet consistent across all sensors. Space and matter were folding into one. The team could only watch as the column expanded, stretching toward the stars before vanishing in absolute silence. When power returned an hour later, the mesa was still. But something fundamental had changed. The ranch's magnetic field stabilized. The strange lights disappeared. For the first time in years, the property was quiet. Too quiet. At dawn, a drone flight over the mesa revealed a new formation where the light had emerged, a spiral etched into the ground, hundreds of meters wide, composed of fused glass and melted stone. The shape matched an ancient petroglyph found in Ute mythology, the symbol of the Gate of Return. The team stood before it in awe. One scientist whispered, "It wasn't trying to frighten us. It was trying to finish something." The lead investigator wrote in his final field report that day, "The phenomenon is no longer contained by the ranch. The interface has merged with the environment. What was below and above has now become everywhere. The world itself may be the instrument, and for the first time since Skinwalker Ranch became a legend, there was no fear, only the terrible, sacred stillness that follows awakening. When dawn broke over Skinwalker Ranch after the night of the awakening, the desert lay shrouded in fog. It had never done that before. The air was still, the sky a dull metallic gray, and the mesa, once humming with invisible energy, now stood completely silent. Instruments reported nothing. No magnetic anomalies, no radio noise, no heat spikes. Even the wildlife had vanished. The scientists, exhausted and sleepless, walked the perimeter in disbelief. The ground still bore the melted spiral carved by the light, but the atmosphere felt hollow, emptied of something vast. The team had spent years chasing chaos, and now that chaos had simply stopped. At first, they thought the stillness was victory and ending. But as the hours passed, unease grew. The air carried a density they couldn't explain, a pressure that made every breath feel measured. Electronic equipment powered on, but displays showed blank screens, as if waiting for input. GPS units couldn't find satellites. Compass needles didn't point north, they pointed toward the mesa. On the second night, subtle vibrations returned. The earth didn't quake, it breathed. The researchers set up microphones and seismographs, but the readings didn't match any geological model. Instead of random movement, the tremors formed waves, slow, deliberate, almost musical. When translated into audio, they created a sound like distant chanting. The linguist analyzed the frequency pattern and found a horrifying correlation. It matched human brainwave rhythms during REM sleep. The ranch wasn't dead. It was dreaming. Then came the visions. Cameras left running overnight captured faint silhouettes moving along the horizon shapes, made of light, not shadow. The figures appeared to study the melted spiral before dissolving into the morning mist. The footage contained no time codes. When played frame by frame, the scene looped endlessly, beginning where it ended, as if caught in a perfect temporal circle. By the end of that week, every member of the team began experiencing vivid, identical dreams. They stood in the same cavern beneath the mesa, before the same black structure. This time, the surface was open, an infinite void filled with floating symbols. From within the darkness, a voice spoke softly. "You finished your measurement. Now we measure you." The dreams were accompanied by waking effects, flickering lights, phantom echoes, headaches synchronized across multiple people. One physicist collapsed, convulsing, whispering a phrase over and over, "We are the equation." Desperate, the remaining researchers evacuated the ranch. Yet, even miles away, the phenomenon followed. Phones glitched, screens flickered with static, and in the static came a faint whispering that none dared play twice. The government classified the site indefinitely, sealing it under new restrictions and designing it as an ecological anomaly. Weeks later, satellite imagery revealed something unsettling. The spiral etched into the ranch's soil had changed shape. It now extended outward, forming thin, faint lines radiating into the surrounding desert, lines that aligned perfectly with magnetic ley paths across the western United States. Whatever had awakened beneath the mesa was no longer confined to it. The final entry in the lead investigator's recovered journal contained only a single paragraph, written by hand in ink that had bled into the paper, as though scorched from within. "We wanted answers. We wanted to prove that what we saw could be measured, replicated, explained. But there are no boundaries between science and faith when the universe looks back. A ranch was never haunted. It was a mirror. We stared too long, and now it remembers us." No further readings were ever recorded from Skinwalker Ranch. The sensors still transmit faint carrier signals, empty of data, like a radio waiting for a reply that will never come. And yet, on rare nights, pilots flying over the Uinta Basin report a glow beneath the clouds, soft, rhythmic, pulsing in 3s, then 7s, then 12s. No one dares investigate because everyone who ever studied the ranch learned the same truth in the end. You don't leave Skinwalker Ranch. It leaves with you.